You know that feeling when you open your bank account and see a number that's significantly higher than usual. Maybe it's a year-end bonus, a tax refund, some unexpected commission check, or one of those rare moments when the universe decides to be financially generous. And for about 5 seconds, you feel this surge of possibility, like you're suddenly in control, like you've been given this gift of breathing room. But then, and this is where it gets interesting, something strange happens. That money doesn't feel like regular money, it feels different, lighter somehow, less serious. And before you really process what's happening, you're mentally spending it on things that weren't even on your radar 10 minutes ago. A weekend trip, that gadget you've been eyeing, a nicer dinner. Maybe just letting it dissolve into your checking account where it quietly evaporates into your normal spending patterns until one day you look up and realize, wait, where did all that money go? My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, behavioral psychology, and why we make the financial decisions we do, especially the ones that seem totally logical in the moment, but completely baffling 6 months later. And this thing with bonus checks, with unexpected money, it's one of the most fascinating patterns in personal finance because it reveals something deeper about how we relate to money that isn't in our regular paycheck. We treat it differently, we give it different rules. And understanding why we do that, and more importantly, what we should actually be doing with that money, might be one of the most valuable shifts you can make in your financial life. Because here's the thing, most people waste these checks. Not because they're irresponsible or bad with money, but because they're following this invisible script in their head that says extra money equals permission to spend. And that script, that unconscious pattern, is costing people thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars over the course of their lives. Money that could have genuinely changed their financial trajectory. So what I want to do here is walk through exactly what happens psychologically when we get these bonus checks, why our instincts lead us astray. And then, this is the important part, give you a completely different framework for thinking about this money. A system that actually works. Something practical and realistic that doesn't require you to be some kind of financial monk, but that radically changes what these checks do for your life. Because the difference between someone who handles bonus money well and someone who doesn't isn't really about willpower or discipline. It's about having a plan before the money hits your account. It's about understanding your own psychology well enough to work with it instead of against it. So let's start with why we mess this up in the first place. Because understanding the problem is honestly half the solution. There's this concept in behavioral economics called mental accounting, and it basically means we put money into different mental buckets depending on where it came from or what we think it's for. Your regular paycheck, that goes into the serious money bucket, rent, groceries, bills, savings if you're disciplined, but bonus money, that goes into a completely different bucket, one that feels more like monopoly money, more like found cash, more like it doesn't count against your real financial life. Richard Thaler, the guy who won a Nobel Prize partially for this work, found that people treat money fundamentally differently based on its source. Even though, and this is the crazy part, money is fungible. $1 from your bonus is worth exactly the same as $1 from your paycheck. They have identical purchasing power. They can accomplish identical financial goals, but we don't feel that way. The bonus dollar feels more spendable, more fun, less serious. And this disconnect between the logical reality of money and the emotional reality of how we experience it creates this trap where we make decisions that don't actually serve us. I saw this play out with a friend of mine, let's call him Marcus, who got a $5,000 bonus one December. Marcus was, by most measures, pretty good with money. He had a budget, he saved a decent percentage of his income, he wasn't drowning in debt. But when that bonus hit, something shifted. He immediately started thinking about this trip to Japan he'd always wanted to take. And in his mind, because this was extra money, because it wasn't part of his normal financial ecosystem, spending it on the trip felt completely reasonable. He even said to me, I mean, when else am I going to do this? It's basically free money. But here's what he wasn't considering. Marcus had $8,000 in credit card debt sitting there at 19% interest. He also had no emergency fund to speak of, and his retirement account was basically non-existent because he'd been prioritizing other things. So that $5,000 bonus, if he'd used it strategically, could have cut his debt almost in half, which would have saved him thousands in interest over time and freed up his monthly budget. Or it could have become the foundation of an emergency fund that would have prevented him from going further into debt the next time his car broke down. Or it could have gone into his retirement account where, compounding over decades, it might have turned into $40,000 or $50,000 by the time he retired. But because of mental accounting, because that money felt different, none of those options even really registered as possibilities. The trip felt obvious. The trip felt earned. And 6 months later, Marcus was frustrated with himself because his financial situation hadn't changed at all, because he was still dealing with the same stress about debt and savings. And that bonus, that genuine opportunity, had come and gone without making any lasting impact on his life. So what should Marcus have done? What should any of us do when unexpected money shows up? Well, this is where having a framework becomes crucial, because in the moment, when that money is sitting there looking at you, your brain isn't going to naturally make optimal decisions. You need rules you decided on beforehand. You need a system. I like to use a modified version of the 50-30-20 rule specifically for bonus checks and unexpected money, and it looks like this. 50% goes to your most important financial goal. 30% goes to your second most important financial goal, and 20% goes to guilt-free spending. Now, the specific percentages can shift based on your situation. Maybe it's 60-20-20 or 40-40-20. But the structure is what matters. You're dividing the money with intention before you have a chance to mentally reclassify it all as fun money. Let's break down what those categories actually mean, because this isn't just some arbitrary rule I pulled out of nowhere. The 50% to your top financial goal is about creating momentum. It's about taking these windfall moments and turning them into genuine financial progress instead of letting them evaporate. For most people, this should be one of three things: paying down high-interest debt, building or fortifying an emergency fund, or making a significant retirement contribution. And which one you pick depends entirely on where you are financially. If you have credit card debt, if you have personal loans with interest rates above, say, 7 or 8%, that's your target. Because paying down that debt is a guaranteed return equal to whatever interest rate you're paying. If you're paying 18% interest on a credit card, paying down that balance is the equivalent of earning an 18% return on an investment, which is basically impossible to guarantee anywhere else. So you take half of that bonus and you attack the debt. You watch that balance drop. And what happens is you create this psychological win, this visible progress that actually motivates you to keep going. Plus, you reduce your monthly minimum payments, which frees up cash flow in your regular budget, which makes everything else easier. If you don't have high-interest debt, or if it's manageable, then your 50% probably should go to your emergency fund. And I know, emergency funds are boring. They're the least exciting thing you can do with money. They just sit there, not growing much, waiting for something bad to happen. But here's what I've learned watching people navigate financial stress. The difference between someone who has an emergency fund and someone who doesn't isn't just financial, it's emotional. It's the difference between a car repair being an inconvenience and a car repair being a crisis. It's the difference between handling a medical bill without derailing your entire month and going into debt because you have no choice. The emergency fund is peace of mind in dollar form. And using bonus money to build it means you're getting there much faster than trying to scrape together $50 a month from your regular budget. And if you've got the debt under control and you've got a solid emergency fund, 3 to 6 months of expenses sitting in a high-yield savings account, then honestly, the 50% should go to retirement. Because here's something most people don't really internalize. The money you invest in your 20s and 30s has so much more power than money you invest later because of compound growth. That $2,500 from a $5,000 bonus, invested at age 30, might turn into $30,000 or $40,000 by the time you're 65. But that same $2,500 invested at age 50 might only turn into $7,000 or $8,000. The time is what creates the magic. So using bonuses to make these larger, irregular contributions to retirement accounts can have this disproportionate impact on your long-term wealth. Now let's talk about that 20% for guilt-free spending, because this is where I think a lot of traditional personal finance advice goes wrong. There's this tendency in the financial independence community, this whole every dollar should be optimized mentality that, while well-intentioned, often backfires. Because humans aren't robots. We need wins. We need to feel like life is happening now, not just in some theoretical future where we've perfectly optimized everything. So the 20% is your permission slip. It's the money you get to spend on whatever you want without guilt, without second-guessing, without feeling like you're sabotaging your future. Maybe it's that dinner you've been wanting to try. Maybe it's concert tickets. Maybe it's just upgrading something in your life that's been annoying you, better headphones, a nicer desk chair, whatever brings you genuine joy or comfort. The point is, you've already allocated 80% of the bonus to meaningful financial goals. You've already done the responsible thing. This 20% is your reward for being smart with the rest of it. And here's why this works. It satisfies that psychological urge to treat bonus money differently without derailing your finances. You get to feel like the bonus is fun money because part of it genuinely is. But you're not falling into the trap of treating all of it that way. You're threading the needle between being too restrictive and being too loose. And in my experience, people who use a framework like this actually stick with it because it doesn't feel punishing. It feels balanced. I remember when I got my first decent bonus. I think it was around $3,000 after taxes, and I was so proud of myself because I immediately put half of it toward my student loans. I watched my balance drop by $1,500, and it felt incredible. But then I took that remaining $1,500 and I basically just let it blend into my checking account, telling myself I'd be good with it. I'd use it for normal expenses. And you know what happened? It was gone within 6 weeks and I couldn't tell you what I spent it on. Groceries, gas, random takeout, a few things on Amazon. It just disappeared. And I didn't even get the satisfaction of consciously enjoying it, because I hadn't given myself permission to actually spend it on anything specific. It was this weird middle ground where I didn't save it all, but I also didn't enjoy it. I just wasted it through 1,000 tiny, forgettable transactions. So now, when I get any kind of windfall, I literally split it immediately. 50% to whatever my top financial goal is at the moment. Right now, that's maxing out my retirement accounts. 30% to my second goal, which is usually saving for a house down payment. And 20% that I consciously spend on something I'll actually remember and appreciate. Last time it was a weekend trip with my partner. The time before that it was this nice watch I'd been thinking about for months. And the key is, I enjoyed those things without guilt because I knew I'd already taken care of the important stuff. The fun spending wasn't in conflict with my financial goals. It was part of the same system. Okay, so here's something else that's really important about bonus checks that nobody talks about: timing. Specifically, the speed at which you execute your plan matters way more than you'd think. Because there's this window of opportunity when the bonus first hits your account where you still have clarity, where your intentions are still strong, where the money still feels separate from your regular cash flow. But that window closes fast, like really fast. I've seen this happen over and over. Someone gets a bonus, they have good intentions, they tell themselves they're going to do the smart thing with it, but they don't actually move the money right away. They leave it sitting and checking, for now, just until they have a moment to really think through their options, just until they pay this one bill that's coming up, just until they figure out the exact right move. And what happens is the money starts to feel like it's part of their normal balance. It gets absorbed into their mental picture of what they have available to spend. And then, little by little, it gets eaten away by normal life, by expenses that feel necessary in the moment but aren't really moving them forward, by the psychological permission to spend a bit more freely because there's extra cushion right now. And this isn't a willpower problem. This is a systems problem. Because your brain is really, really good at rationalizing present spending. It's exceptional at finding reasons why this particular expense makes sense, why it's different, why it's justified. And when that bonus money is just sitting there, mixed in with your regular funds, your brain has constant opportunities to rationalize little dips into it. Death by 1,000 cuts. So the solution is simple but non-negotiable. You move the money immediately. The day the bonus hits your account, ideally within hours, you execute the plan. 50% goes to your top financial goal. You make the debt payment. You transfer it to your high-yield savings account. You contribute it to your IRA or 401k. 30% goes to your second goal, and that 20% for guilt-free spending. You can either spend it immediately on something you've been wanting, or you move it to a completely separate account, like a fun money account, where it's clearly designated and separated from your regular funds. This immediacy does two things. First, it removes the opportunity for decision fatigue and rationalization. You're not giving yourself the chance to talk yourself out of the smart move. You're executing on a plan you made when you were thinking clearly, before the temptation of having extra money was clouding your judgment. Second, it makes the financial progress real and immediate. You get to see your debt balance drop, or your savings account grow, or your investment contribution confirmed. You get that psychological win right away, which reinforces the behavior and makes you more likely to handle the next bonus or windfall the same way. There's this other dimension to bonus checks that we need to talk about, and it connects to one of the most insidious financial traps that exists: lifestyle inflation. You know what I'm talking about. That tendency for your spending to rise along with your income, so that no matter how much you make, you never really feel like you're getting ahead. You get a raise and suddenly your old apartment feels too small. You get a promotion and suddenly you need a nicer car. Your income goes up, but your financial stress stays exactly the same because your expenses went up right along with it. And bonus checks, if you're not careful, can be this catalyst for lifestyle inflation because they represent this sudden increase in resources. And your brain interprets that increase as permission to upgrade your baseline life. But here's the thing: lifestyle inflation is really hard to reverse. It's easy to let your spending creep up. It's psychologically brutal to cut back once you've gotten used to something. Moving from a small apartment to a bigger one feels like progress. Moving from the bigger apartment back to a smaller one feels like failure, even if financially it's the smart move. So using the framework we talked about, where most of the bonus goes to financial goals and only a portion goes to spending, creates this immunity to lifestyle inflation. Because you're not letting the bonus artificially inflate your sense of what you can afford ongoing. You're treating it as what it is, a one-time influx of cash that should be used for one-time things. Either one-time debt payments, one-time savings contributions, one-time investments, or one-time purchases. You're not using it to justify ongoing expenses like a more expensive apartment or a car payment that's higher than you can actually sustain. I think about this with my own life. A few years ago, I got a pretty substantial performance bonus, maybe around $8,000 after taxes. And my first instinct was to think about how I could use that to upgrade something ongoing in my life. Maybe move to a slightly nicer apartment, maybe get a newer car, maybe just give myself permission to spend more freely month to month. And if I had followed that instinct, I would have been worse off. Because those ongoing upgrades would have eaten into my monthly cash flow, they would have made my regular budget tighter. They would have reduced my ability to save and invest from my normal income. The bonus would have actually made my financial position more fragile, not stronger. But instead, I used the framework. Most of it went to maxing out my IRA for that year, which I hadn't been able to do from regular income alone. A chunk went to building up my emergency fund. And yeah, I spent some of it on a fun trip, but it was a one-time thing, not an ongoing commitment. And the result was my financial foundation got stronger while my monthly expenses stayed exactly the same. So the next year, when I didn't get as big of a bonus, it didn't matter. My baseline life was still totally affordable, and any bonus that did come was just additional progress, not something I was depending on to maintain my lifestyle. Okay, quick practical aside here that's honestly really important. Bonuses are usually taxed differently than regular income. And a lot of people don't realize this until they're confused and disappointed by their actual take-home amount. Employers often withhold taxes on bonuses at a flat rate, usually 22% for federal taxes, but depending on your total income for the year. You might actually owe more or less than that when you file your tax return. What this means practically is two things. First, don't make plans based on the pre-tax bonus amount. If your employer says you're getting a $10,000 bonus, you're probably actually getting somewhere between $6,500 and $7,500, depending on state taxes and other withholdings. Make your 50-30-20 split based on what actually hits your account, not the bigger number you heard about. Second, if you're getting a really large bonus relative to your salary, it might actually bump you into a higher tax bracket or trigger other tax implications, which means you might owe additional money when you file your return. So building in a small buffer for that possibility is smart. I don't want to get too deep into tax strategy here because, honestly, everyone's situation is different, and you should probably talk to a tax professional if you're dealing with large bonuses regularly. But just be aware that the number you see as your gross bonus and the number you actually have to work with are different, and plan accordingly. So we've talked about the mechanics, the specific percentages, the immediate action, the psychological traps to avoid. But I want to zoom out for a second and talk about what happens when you consistently handle bonus money well. Because there are these second-order effects that compound over time in ways that aren't immediately obvious. First, you develop trust in yourself financially. Every time you get a windfall and handle it well, you're reinforcing this identity as someone who makes good financial decisions, someone who can be trusted with money, someone who doesn't cave to every impulse. And that self-trust is incredibly valuable because it makes future decisions easier. It reduces the anxiety and second-guessing. You develop a track record with yourself. Second, you create financial momentum that's way more powerful than slow, incremental progress alone. Think about it. If you're saving $200 a month toward an emergency fund, it's going to take you more than 2 years to save $5,000. But if you get a $5,000 bonus and put half of it toward that fund immediately, you've just compressed a year of progress into a single day. And that leap forward is motivating. It makes you feel like your goals are actually achievable. It changes your relationship with your financial future from this distant, maybe someday thing to something that's actually happening, something you can see moving. Third, you insulate yourself from financial stress in ways that are hard to quantify but incredibly valuable. Every dollar you put toward debt is reducing your monthly obligations and giving you more flexibility. Every dollar in your emergency fund is reducing the chance that some unexpected expense turns into a crisis. Every dollar invested is building long-term security. These things reduce stress, improve sleep, strengthen relationships, make work less fraught because you're not desperate to hold onto a job you hate. The financial benefits are obvious, but the life quality benefits are just as real and maybe more important. Look, I want to be really honest about something. You don't have to be perfect at this. You don't have to optimize every dollar. You don't have to feel guilty if you occasionally get a bonus and blow more of it on fun stuff than the framework suggests. The point isn't to become some kind of joyless efficiency machine, where every financial decision is perfectly calculated. The point is to have a default plan that's good enough that, most of the time, you're making decisions that serve your future self without completely sacrificing your present happiness. Some bonuses you might go 70-20 because you're really motivated to crush a financial goal. Other times you might go 40-20-40 because life is short and that opportunity to do something memorable feels more important in the moment. The framework is a guideline, not a straitjacket. But having the framework at all, having that structure to return to, makes a massive difference compared to just winging it every time. And honestly, the biggest mistake isn't occasionally breaking your own rules. The biggest mistake is not having any rules at all, not having any system for thinking about this differently than regular income. Because without a system, the default is almost always going to be treating bonus money like it's less important, less serious, less worthy of intention than your regular paycheck. And that default is what costs people so much over time. Here's something that keeps me up at night sometimes. This idea that really hits home when you sit down and do the math. Every dollar you spend is a dollar you're not investing. And because of compound growth, that dollar could have been worth a lot more in the future. This is the opportunity cost of spending, and most people don't really internalize it, especially with bonus money. If you're 30 years old and you get a $5,000 bonus, and you spend all of it on a fun vacation or new stuff for your apartment, that's $5,000 that's gone. You got whatever happiness or utility the spending provided, but the money itself is done working for you. But if you had invested that $5,000 in a diversified stock market index fund, and it grows at an average of 7% per year adjusted for inflation, by the time you're 65, that $5,000 has turned into about $40,000. $40,000 from one $5,000 bonus, that's the opportunity cost. That's what you're actually choosing between, not $5,000 of spending versus $5,000 of investing, but $5,000 of spending now versus $40,000 later. And I'm not saying you should never spend money, that you should just invest everything and live like a monk for decades. But I am saying that understanding this trade-off, really feeling it, changes how you think about these decisions. That vacation might have been worth $5,000 of value to you in the moment. Maybe it created memories you'll cherish. Maybe it was an experience you couldn't replicate later. Maybe it genuinely added significant value to your life. And if that's true, then spending the money makes sense. But often, when people really think about it, the vacation wasn't worth $40,000 of future wealth. It was worth something, sure, but not that much. And that realization is what shifts behavior. So when you get a bonus, I think it's worth taking a few minutes to actually calculate this. Take whatever amount you're thinking about spending and plug it into a compound interest calculator with your age and expected retirement age. See what that money could become. And then ask yourself honestly, is what I want to buy right now worth more to me than that future amount? Sometimes the answer will be yes. But a lot of times, once you really confront the trade-off, the answer becomes clearly no, and the right decision becomes a lot easier. So we've covered a lot of ground here. The psychology of why we mess up with bonus money, the specific framework for splitting it up, the importance of immediate action, the second-order effects of getting it right. But I want to end with probably the most practical piece of advice. You need to build this system before you get the bonus. You need to decide what you're going to do with windfall money before it hits your account. Because once it's there, once it's real, your brain is going to start playing tricks on you. Here's what I recommend. Right now, before your next bonus or tax refund or unexpected check, sit down and answer these questions. What's my top financial priority right here? Is it debt? Is it my emergency fund? Is it retirement? Be specific, write it down. Then what's my second priority? And what percentage split makes sense for my situation? Is it 50-30-20? Or should I adjust it based on how urgent my priorities are? Then, and this is crucial, figure out the logistics before you need them. Where exactly will the money go? Do you need to set up a high-yield savings account for your emergency fund? Do you need to figure out how to make contributions to your IRA? Do you need to know the login information for your debt accounts? Make sure all of this is figured out ahead of time so that when the money comes, you can execute immediately without friction, without excuses, without giving yourself time to reconsider. Maybe even write yourself a note, like a literal letter from your current self to your future self explaining why you set up this system, what your goals are, why it matters. Because when the bonus actually hits and part of your brain is screaming about all the fun things you could buy, it helps to have that reminder from a version of yourself that was thinking clearly and long-term. And honestly, if you want to take it even further, you can automate some of this. Some employers let you split direct deposits, so you could have part of your bonus automatically go to a separate savings or investment account. Some debt accounts let you set up automatic payments. The more you can make the right decision the default, the path of least resistance, the more likely you are to actually follow through. Look, money is weird. It's this thing that's simultaneously incredibly important for our security and well-being, and also just a tool, just a means to an end. And bonus checks, these little injections of extra cash, they're these moments of opportunity where we get to choose what kind of relationship we want to have with money. We can let them slip away into forgettable spending, or we can use them to actually change our financial trajectory. Most people waste them not because they're bad people or stupid with money, but because they don't have a plan, because they let their instincts take over. Because they treat bonus money like it's fundamentally different from regular money, even though it's not. But you, now that you've thought through this, now that you understand the psychology and have a framework, you have the chance to be different. To be one of the people who uses these moments to build real wealth, real security, real freedom. It's not about being perfect. It's not about never enjoying money or always making the optimal decision. It's about having a system that's good enough, that balances progress and enjoyment, that works with your psychology instead of against it. 50% to your most important goal, 30% to your second goal, 20% to guilt-free spending. Move the money immediately. Understand the opportunity cost. Build the system before you need it. Do that consistently whenever windfall money comes your way. And in 5 years, in 10 years, you'll look back and realize that those bonuses, those moments that most people let slip away, were the inflection points in your financial life. The moments when you made progress that would have taken years otherwise. The moments when you chose your future self over your immediate impulses. And that's not just about money. That's about becoming the kind of person who can delay gratification, who can see beyond the moment, who can build something meaningful over time. That's a skill that compounds in every area of life. So the next time a bonus check hits your account, you'll know exactly what to do, and you'll do it, and your future self will thank you.